What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Toasty Podcast. My name is Skye, and today we have a special Zoom call for you with Peter Goodman. He's an established journalist as well as an author. His latest book is kind of what sparked my interest into this Zoom meeting with him. You guys can check that out with the link in the description below for this podcast episode. Just go ahead and do that now. Why not? And then, without further ado, here's Peter Goodman. Let's get toasty.
Hey guys.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hello?
Can you hear us pretty good?
I can hear you fine.
Sweet.
Are you
Very
happy with the sounds?
Yeah, man, it sounds great, honestly.
It's really good.
I'm not always worried about guests and sound because it's not a huge deal. People know that we're remote, you know what I mean? So,
Oh, okay. But I shelled out for a nice microphone and everything.
oh, dude, no, it sounds way better than other. Okay, yes, if you want that, like that credit, dude, you got it, man.
Okay.
The mic sounds
right.
great, man. The mic sounds great. Thank you for doing video too. I didn't realize that you usually just do audio on these things. Is it just
No. I often do video.
Okay.
I just don't know. If we're doing video, then I sit in a different part of the room. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, gotcha.
And I got
gotcha.
a light. Yeah.
You gotta be well read, with all the books behind you,
Well, it's such a cliche, but I'm sitting in my garage office, so the rest of the place is hard to look at.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Well, when we're looking up at our screen that we have in the studio. That's just where you're at. So if you don't feel weird if I'm not looking straight at you. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's fine.
Cool.
Where are you
Sweet.
guys, by the way?
Fort Worth, Texas, man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where we're out of. So we just do politics, society, culture. But I try to have guests on that other quote unquote right leaning podcasts would not have on. If that makes sense. I don't really subscribe to the idea that I have to stay in my echo chamber. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Also, your book is freaking good, and why not
thanks.
have you on? So anyway, that's where we're at with that. But not to waste any of your time, I guess we can get into it.
Sure.
So the main thing I have, one of the first questions I want to ask is like, what led you to go to these Davos meetings in the first place? I mean, even before you were going to write the book and all this
Right.
stuff, you were, I guess, a New York Times reporter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an accidental member of the Davos Man parade. I was at the Times from 2007 to 2010, and then Ariana Huffington basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I went off and ran her newsroom for a few years, and there was a sort of 15 minutes of fame where I was like one of the first quote unquote legit mainstream journalists to go work for this digital upstart. And she was in the process, I didn't know this at the time, of selling HuffPost to AOL for several $100 million. So I was like her trophy. And she loves Davos, loves any gathering of billionaires where she can go and look for investment for her next venture. So she brought me along to sort of show like, hey, look what I got. And that was my first taste of Davos. That would have been like early 2011. And then I actually found it, both appalling and horrifying and fascinating. I'm just not an access journalist. I'm a field guy. Like I started my career as a freelancer in Southeast Asia. I spent the first part of 2003 in Iraq. I've traveled widely in Asia. I spent a lot of time traveling throughout China for the Washington Post. I've been all over Southeast Asia. I'm a like go talk to people who don't expect to run into somebody with a notebook in their hands kind of reporter. So to be
That's
in a
awesome.
place where there's it's all about access to rich, powerful people. That's just not how I operate. But I also didn't feel beholden to the code of like, well, let's just play nice and pull our punches to try to ingratiate ourselves. So I just asked, the same sort of rude questions I would ask anywhere. And I found it pretty useful. So I kept going.
Yeah, first of all, kudos to your career, I guess, because that's crazy. Being well-traveled. As far as journalists go, I feel like that's a lot less common now, but maybe I'm wrong. I just know that you seem like you've definitely got the experience behind you whenever you go into things like that. So, like the
Thanks.
and speaking of reporting, you said you had a story to do. Were you doing like the Amazon workforce story that's in like Southern America right now?
I have not been writing about Amazon,
Okay,
except peripherally.
well,
I'm,
because
I'm
like
doing a bunch of stuff on the supply chain, but my colleagues have been doing all kinds of stuff on
gotcha,
Amazon.
gotcha. Yeah, because I know in the book it was talking about Chris Smalls and all of
Right.
that, and I was wondering because it's literally updating right now. Like they're gaining headway and like kind of winning, I guess, so to speak, against
Oh,
Amazon.
yeah.
So
No, it's a
that's
major
awesome.
trend.
That's awesome to me. Knowing what they do and how they operate now is like, wow. I actually kind of agree with it. So that's interesting. But I never thought I would. I never thought I would grow up in Texas and then agree with someone unionizing, but that's just
Yeah.
how it is, I guess.
People got to get their piece of the action, or
Yeah.
society breaks down.
Right.
And people, if there's one thing we've learned, and this is part of my book, it's if we're just counting on the goodness of the people running corporations to give workers what they need to support their families, like think again.
Right.
Nobody gets anything without mobilizing.
Right. Corporations are profit driven, not charity driven. That's for sure.
Right, and that's not to demonize them either, but
Right.
like we just got to be clear about that. I mean, corporations are organized to return profit to shareholders.
Right,
They
exactly.
do that really well, and some of them, in addition, deliver all kinds of innovation and products, and that's all to the good. I'm a capitalist. I got no problem with that, but workers are not just going to get paid enough to support their families by just hoping that the boss will be nice to them. I mean, they have
Yeah.
they have to organize and demonstrate their worth.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so speaking of that, what do you think about this whole Elon Twitter thing, huh?
I mean, the Elon Twitter thing is really interesting. I mean, because you guys have read my book. I mean, I just think time and again we fall for the sideshow, and the main event is this bottom up distribution of wealth that's played out not by accident, but steadily, with the wealthiest people, using their money to purchase political power and then using that political power to help amass more money. And Elon Musk has done that as well as anybody. So we're supposed to be having this whole debate about, free speech. Should anyone be able to say whatever they want on this giant social platform, or should there be rules? Should somebody be editing to make sure that we're not just trading in wild conspiracy theories, hate speech? Well, as long as we're talking about that, and people can have different views on that, we're not talking about taxing billionaires. We're not talking about antitrust enforcement.
Right.
We're not talking about collective bargaining for labor. So, Elon Musk, like every billionaire, benefits from the perpetuation of the status quo. And the status quo is billionaires have mobilized very effectively to transfer wealth from just about everybody to themselves. And that's left huge numbers of people, not just in our country, but around the world. I mean, my book is global, concluding quite rightfully that their needs and their abilities to support their families, like they just don't count for very much, according to the people who are running our economies and our political systems. And that part's real. And then that's an invitation to a whole bunch of political opportunists who come in and they stir up fears of the immigrants, of Central American gangs. We have, religious-based feuds. Like we fall for it again and again, where we're arguing over stuff that really doesn't solve our problems. I mean, what will solve our fundamental problems is figuring out how to get more people capturing a slice of our very successful form of capitalism. So Musk buying Twitter and saying, we need more free speech absolutism and no content moderation. That's just an open recipe for more of what we already got, which is this toxic debate, people blaming one another, shouting at one another, which makes it very difficult to govern. It perpetuates the status quo in which he wins.
Well, I mean, you can. I don't know how serious he is about making it straight. Anyone say whatever they want, but he says he is, right? And it would relate to 4chan to me. Like if they go that route and they're like, oh, you can say whatever you want and this is what it is. 4chan's the same way. They couldn't. It was ungovernable, and now it's like, oh crap, what do we do? So I can see it going. If it was just literally open,
Yeah,
completely open.
I think
can see it
even
going that
according
way,
to Musk, he even said he's going to cut off the far left and the far right and just kind of appease that 80%, that parabolic curve of the 80% in the middle that are just kind of reasonable, moderate people. And he said that Musk said that both sides are kind of going to get a little bit agitated about, quote unquote, the absolute free speech that's going to be on Twitter. So
right. Well, I mean, even still, though, you're right, Peter, because, that's not really the conversation that probably should be had, as far as fixing what's happening in the country.
Yeah,
according to your book, it seems like it literally all points to the billionaires that would be at this Davos meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, I used the Davos meeting not as this sort of puppeteer conspiracy, but as a look at this tribe that I call Davos Man. That's a term I stole from Samuel Huntington, who coined it in the Political Sciences in 2004 to refer to people who go to the World Economic Forum. But I'm using it broadly to refer to billionaires who would have us believe that so long as we organize our economies and our political systems around returning more wealth to the people who have most of it already, we all somehow win. That's what I refer to in the book as the cosmic lie. It's trickle-down economics, this idea that we can count on the billionaire class to just solve our problems, something that in real life has happened 0 times.
Right.
So would you consider, I think you kind of just answered the question, but would you consider Musk a Davos man? Because I guess to argue against him being a Davos man, you could say like, oh, well, he's really trying to advance electric cars and colonize space and that sort of thing to advance broad,
society,
very far-reaching, human life. But at the same time, he is doing things like you said to perpetuate the status quo and to just contain power as much as he can and consolidate it. He is now the richest man in the world, so he's doing a good job of it.
Yeah, I think he's a Davos man. And let's be clear, it's not that Davos man refers to people who have no redeeming value. I mean, Jeff Bezos is a Davos man, right? He's one of my 5 primary characters in the book. Jeff Bezos is a genius.
Right.
He's revolutionized consumption. How would we have gotten through the pandemic without e-commerce? He's proven masterful at running really complicated logistics operations. Sorry, I just got to turn off my phone. Forgive me. I hope that didn't mess you guys up.
No, dude, you're good. This is we're relaxed,
okay.
man.
Okay. Bezos, props to him for having a brilliant idea and executing it. So it's not that we're saying he has no value. We're just saying, hey, you got to pay your taxes. Everything you've built is built atop public infrastructure. There is no Amazon without the internet. There is no Amazon without legions of coders who are educated, often in publicly financed places of education. You can't deliver all this stuff without highways that we're all maintaining through our tax dollars. And by the way, society doesn't function if one person's worth $200 billion while huge numbers of people who are eager to work literally can't keep groceries on their kids' tables. Like society breaks down. We start blaming one another. So Musk, thanks Musk for reconceiving the auto industry. Why is this still bleeping at us when I just turned on do not disturb? Okay, I think that should work. Sorry about that. Why? Oh, here we go. Okay, I need do not disturb. Okay, now we're good. Musk has certainly revolutionized automobiles, and in terms of climate change, that's tremendous. But again, this is a guy who doesn't pay his taxes, who denigrates the concept of progressive taxation, who's hostile to labor unions. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I would say out of all the billionaires, he does pay more than them, right? Like, didn't he pay like the most taxes any freaking billionaire has ever paid, like 7 million or some crap? It may not be what he should be paying, but I think out of all the billionaires, that's probably why Matt brought up the question, Elon seems to be the closest we have to someone that might do good in the tax realm.
It's trying to be relatively fair. That I agree with you in the fact that people need to pay their taxes. Like there's that old thing about Warren Buffett paying less than his secretary because capital gains and this and that, and his salary is like $50,000 a year or whatever. But I think just the elimination of loopholes, corporate loopholes, just a simple. I'm super conservative, so my solution is just going to be as simple as possible, just a flat tax. If you just tax everyone, the same relatively. I'm not for a progressive tax system, and that's kind of just where I stand. But if everyone just kind of paid, like quote unquote, their fair share, like let's just say 10%, I feel like a lot of those loopholes just would be eliminated. A lot of good would come from that. A lot of simplification would come from that, and people would be. I don't know if no one's ever going to be eager to pay their taxes, but people, if there's no loopholes to work around or try and snake through to pay less taxes, then they're stuck. They're going to have to pay them.
Simplification is a good thing, but let's remember, if we don't tax wealth, we have an incredibly regressive tax system. I mean, Bezos earns on paper $83,000 a year. That's about what a public school teacher in California earns. So if we only tax income, then we have a situation where these billionaires, thanks to ProPublica, we've learned, they don't even sell their stocks to get the money. So it's worse than, they're paying capital gains taxes, whereas, those of us who are dependent upon paychecks while our employer just, withholds whatever the tax rate is. That's unequal by itself if you're dependent upon capital gains. These guys don't even sell their shares to generate capital gains. They just borrow against their holdings. And then one day when they die, it's like the ultimate reverse mortgage that gets paid back. So they effectively pay zero.
Right.
And, let's just take stock of the fact that we live in a country where the political discourse is full of this idea, whatever your ideology, that, we can't afford single payer healthcare. We can't afford infrastructure like they have in every other developed economy. We can't afford to make it easier for people to go to college. These are things that every other major developed economy manages to afford. And you can be conservative, liberal, progressive, whatever you call yourself. I mean, in the UK, you could be the most conservative person in the country and you're committed to national health care, that everybody gets to go to the doctor. You go to the emergency room, there's no bill at all. You need to see somebody, and baked into that is the fact that the biggest defining characteristic between the United States and every other country is we just don't tax rich people. And you can't tax rich people without going after the sources of their wealth.
Yeah, I mean that relates to what you said about I think it was it New Zealand in your book you were talking about? You were comparing to, was it New
Denmark?
Zealand? Denmark. You were saying they have like basically a socialist democracy where it's like kind of a hybrid, right?
Well,
was it Denmark?
You could call it a hybrid. These are capitalist societies. I talk about Sweden. I talk about Denmark, where there's actually a lot more of the kind of rugged individualism and entrepreneurialism that we like to tell ourselves we have in the States, right? Like we love to talk about how, the Europeans, that's nanny state socialism, the big state, generous unemployment benefits. The truth is that there are a lot more startups in much of Europe than there are in the US, because in the States, we are so insecure. If you fail in the States, it is so lonely and devastating that people are afraid to take a risk. People are stuck in dead-end jobs where they know they're not going to advance, where they're not passionate about what they're doing, but they got health care. It's the only way they can guarantee they're going to provide that for their family, so they stay put. I remember years ago, I went to this is in my book. I went to this mining operation in Sweden where there were all these jobs threatened by self-driving cars and other forms of automation. And I talked to the workers there. And as an American, I just assumed they would be horrified by this. And they all said, oh, no, we're fine with it. Because, if we lose our jobs, they'll probably train us for some other job. It'll make the company more profitable and competitive. And we know that we'll end up with higher wages as a result. And that wasn't some sort of utopian fantasy. That was based on their lived experience. Because in Sweden, 70 some odd % of the workforce is represented by a union. the unions sit down and they hash out these contracts with these national employers associations, and everyone understands that if companies are more productive, workers get higher wages, which is completely broken down in the States and has largely broken down in the UK. So these guys, as a result, were willing to embrace innovation, disruptive forces, all the stuff that we love to talk about, in Silicon Valley, whereas the American worker is quite rationally opposed to any change to the status quo, because they know, man, if I lose my job, nobody's going to help me. I'm not getting anything. Nobody's going to make sure my kids have health care. Nobody's going to help me train for something new. I mean, let's talk about climate change. Like, how do we tell a coal miner in West Virginia, hey, sorry, the models have concluded that like what you're doing is poisoning us all. Like, it might be hastening the demise of our species. You got to find something else to do. That guy's going to say, yeah, okay, that's great. Like, I'm supposed to move to the Sun Belt and become a solar panel install. Who's paying for that? Who's going to help me with my housing? Who's paying for my training? This lack of a social safety net, which is the result of not taxing rich people in the U.S., actually prevents us from being the ruthless capitalists that we like to think of ourselves as.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like America does have one of the most progressive tax systems in the world, but like we mentioned before, there's so many ways around, the income tax that most billionaires and everything don't pay it. But I do have a quick question about so what do you think about, you said you've been to Asia a lot, in China, all over China.
Yeah, I lived in China for 6 years.
Oh wow,
I started my career freelancing in Southeast Asia.
That's really cool. So there's a lot of Chinese billionaires. Do the Chinese billionaires and the Western country billionaires, the Davos Men, so would you consider Davos Men specifically Western billionaires, or are there any Chinese or Eastern countries, maybe even communist countries?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That you would consider, Davos?
Oh no, there are definitely Asian Davos men. I mean, I deal a little bit with Jack Ma, who's the founder of Alibaba. There are growing numbers of billionaires in countries like India, and they do tend to view their own success as part of larger societal success. There are greater checks in a place like China, where the Chinese Communist Party does not like competition for power and stature and social organization. So they have to lay low more. I mean, you can't run around behaving like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and, flashing your wealth, or the party will come after you. But in terms of the general mindset, that's certainly present around the globe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do those Eastern, I'll just say Eastern billionaires, do they meet at Davos? I know they're connected. I know they communicate with each other in some way.
Yeah, Jack Ma goes to Davos. I see it.
Okay.
I've seen him there for years.
Okay,
yeah, he's a regular. And actually, Chinese Communist Party officials show up at Davos.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum, he will welcome anyone with power, and anyone who will draw other powerful people. And let's face it, China, for better or worse, is the world's largest potential consumer market for damn near everything. Mm-hmm. And so, multinational companies. I mean, the World Economic Forum is a business, right? I mean, it convenes under. It's technically a nonprofit. It convenes under this mantra, committed to improving the state of the world, which is this wonderful phrase for a gathering of the people who are, by any reasonable measure, the ultimate beneficiaries of the status quo. And Schwab loves to talk about, all sorts of idealistic future governance, capitalism 2.0,
his
stakeholder
utopias.
Capitalism. Yeah, he loves to trade in that. But at the end of the day, it's about getting companies to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for membership to the forum. And what better way to get them to the forum than to bring in the leader of the most populous country on earth, or the second most populous, Narendra Modi, who is the Hindu supremacist who controls India. who has been absolutely brutal, to ethnic minorities.
Mm-hmm.
He's been really ham-handed in terms of just his running of the economy. But when he shows up at Davos, I mean, Schwab calls him, a hero to inclusivity and diversity. I mean, he'll say whatever he needs to say to get these incredibly powerful people coming, because it's network effects, right? The more powerful people are there, the more other powerful people will pay to be there, because you can do business that way. And the reality of Davos, I mean, the fantasy, I mean, the part that's served up for all of our consumption is like these very earnest panel discussions that most of the cool kids never go to on, racial and gender equality and corporate governance and climate change and migration. The real Davos is business people meeting in private suites. The head of an oil state meeting a fossil fuel company with no, pain in the ass journalists around, no regulators, no printed record. And Schwab plays matchmaker and puts them together in rooms. So he'll say whatever it takes to get powerful people to show up. That's his currency.
And I guess like you've never been in one of those closed door meetings.
Nope.
I'm assuming, because obviously they would keep it freaking lock and key.
Right.
That's crazy. You said that, you talked about that in your book too, and I was kind of like very intrigued, right? Like, all good conspiracy theories start with a closed door,
Very true.
I mean, there's always a door within a door. Like
Right.
in Davos, you always have that feeling of like, well, I'm here, but there must be all this other stuff going on all around. I mean, you're aware that there are different Davoses for different people, and everybody's wearing these color-coded badges. It's like being back in high school again. Like, the most powerful people have these holograms and no one knows what they mean, and the regular participants have white badges, and then the really pitiful working press have these orange badges, and they're always on the wrong side of some security cordon.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the World Economic Forum, I kind of want to talk about that. So, just kind of to put it to rest a little bit, there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding that people want to believe in or whatever. But the real thing that I got out of your book was that they are actually trying to progress a system they want to call stakeholder capitalism. And I would like to get your thoughts on that, as far as where you see that going, and do you see that, like them wanting stakeholder capitalism, so basically all the governments of the world are shareholders to their world government?
I don't actually think they do want stakeholder capitalism. And I don't think, I think most of the conspiracies about Davos actually perpetuate the idea that the place has influence that it doesn't. I mean, its real influence is just as a place for wealthy people who would meet some other place if Davos didn't exist, to cut deals that are good for them and not necessarily good for anyone else. I mean, all of the rhetoric of the forum itself, I just feel like it's a smokescreen. I mean, I honestly think so. One of my key characters is Larry Fink, right? Larry Fink is the world's largest asset manager. He's now, his company BlackRock is now managing $10 trillion in assets around the world. And he has triggered lots of hate from the right, because he claims to be this champion of stakeholder capitalism, right? This idea that the age of Milton Friedmanism is over. It's not just about companies maximizing shareholder returns through increased profits. No, now, companies are catering to stakeholders, and that means labor, never labor unions. They're very careful not to say that, but, we'll be nice to workers, basically, local communities. And I actually think so there's been this reaction from the right. Oh, you guys this is woke capitalism. I mean, the state of Texas threatened to pull pension investments out of BlackRock, claiming that, Fink is threatening to divest his holdings from fossil fuel companies if they don't do what he wants them to do on climate change. I think Fink loves that, because it creates the impression that he's serious about doing what he's really not doing.
Right.
I mean, stakeholder capitalism is a really sophisticated public relations construct that essentially invites us, the public, to conclude like, oh, the billionaires have awoken to the fact that we don't really like how they've run the world. Now they're going to run the world more to our liking. And therefore, we don't have to regulate them.
Right.
We don't have to tax them. We don't have to bother them with labor unions and antitrust enforcement. We can just let them take care of everything because they've now woken up to our needs. Well, let's look at Larry Fink and BlackRock. This is a company that, despite its highfalutin rhetoric, raised $15 billion in investment for the Saudi oil monopoly to expand their natural gas fields. This is a company that I believe, last I checked, was the third largest holder of JBS, which is this giant Brazilian meatpacking conglomerate that's been clear cutting the Amazon to make room for more cattle ranches so they can actually export Brazilian beef to undercut American cattle ranchers and neatly undercut American family farms at the same time that they're destroying the Amazon. So that's what BlackRock's actually doing if you follow the money. Mm-hmm. Stakeholder capitalism is this great thing to talk about to prevent us from actually pulling the levers of our democracy.
Okay, wow. Yeah.
That's a really good point. That's really something that I was telling Skye before the podcast. Is like, man, that's something where we can totally disagree on maybe taxes or whatever. We can definitely agree that billionaires are, pulling the shade over our eyes and saying, no, we'll take care of it. Elon Musk will buy Twitter and free speech will be back, and that's all you need to worry about. You can just let everything else the billionaires will take care of us. Don't worry. Big bad government's going to get in our way, but Elon Musk will save the day, and Larry Fink will save the day. Because he's holding those big corporations accountable with all that equity that he's got in them. But like you said, he's saying one thing and then doing something else, and that's all over the place too. It's not just him,
Yeah, it's like behind the scenes levers that you're talking about, and I guess my next questions are going to be, how would you solve this? I guess in an American quote, the democracy we have, supposedly. How do you do this? Is it your legislation? Is it your policies you put in place? You know what I mean? Like what do I do as
the key question?
Yeah, the common American, I guess. So like Amazon workers, they're trying to unionize. That's something they can do right now to try to fix Amazon. Is that what do you recommend? Is that what you're
I think, well, first of all, I appreciate the question. It's a really important question because I didn't write this book so people could just feel beleaguered and cynical. The solution to our problems are quite straightforward and simple and extremely difficult to execute, right? We need what we already had. Between 1945 and 1975 or thereabouts, we had much higher rates of taxation on the wealthiest people. We had much higher rates of corporate taxation. We had much higher representation by labor unions, and we had extremely strong economic growth that lifted everybody. The old cliche, the rising tide lifts all boats, it actually worked. We had productive companies that kicked out higher wages to working people. And if you were willing to set an alarm clock and go off to work, whatever your level of skill, there was a good chance that you could make a decent living and support your family and have a vacation and own a car and, not worry about the stuff that dominates people's fears today. Now, I don't have some sort of fetish for going back to 1960. I'm not looking for a time machine. We made a lot of social progress. Look, we had Jim Crow in the South in those years. We had the Vietnam War. Like we've come a long way as a society, and we should hang on to our gains. But we do need to get back to having a system where working people can count on finding adequate opportunities to work hard and support their families. And the ways we do that comes through antitrust enforcement. It comes through boosting labor power. And it comes through progressive taxation so we can finance the stuff that we actually need, like modern infrastructure, which is something Americans used to take for granted and can't anymore, healthcare, housing. Now, the problem is Davos Man is not going to unilaterally disarm. Davos Man will tell us that that's what he's doing, and that's what stakeholder capitalism is all about. It's going to require mobilization. And I think you guys are quite correct to put the focus on Christian Smalls and the union at Amazon. That is an example of a handful of people standing up to a very powerful company with tremendous resources to hire unions. To hire union crushing law firms. They hire, 100 plus lobbyists in Washington. And it's not a coincidence that the people in Washington keep writing rules that are beneficial to Amazon. It's going to require the public understanding that something has been taken from us and mobilizing to get it back. But we're not chasing some, revolution, utopian fantasy. We're chasing something we already had, which is a system where, we're going to have rich people. We're going to have people who invent creations that they turn into money. We're going to have inequality, but we're going to have a basic understanding that the richest people have to pay taxes, and we're going to invest in stuff that pretty much everybody agrees that we need. I mean, in polling, like this idea, in our political discourse, we're invited to conclude that like you got to be a socialist to favor national health care. Again, they got that in every other developed democracy. Every poll shows Americans want some kind of national health care system because we all know what a nightmare it is to if you get sick. We don't know who owns the doctor's offices that we're in. I mean, a lot of my book gets into the impact of private equity magnates like Steve Schwarzman and Blackstone, taking over healthcare. We want a system that functions for more people. And we've had one before. We need to get that back.
There's no transparency in healthcare right now. And I think that's a huge issue we're having, of course. No one knows what they're doing when they go to the doctor. They don't know what they're going to get charged. No one knows that. And I actually agree with you. Yeah, I think there's a way to do some type of, when I walk up to somebody and say, I kind of agree with universal healthcare. I don't say it like that because they're just going to freak out. Of course, I usually say, like a hybrid type system. Maybe there's like some privatized areas of it, but like the basics are covered. That kind of thing is what I usually try to say because I think it's possible. I think it is possible, but. All that to say, also, I wanted to ask you what the tax rates were in the 60s. I think you mentioned it in your book. It was like
they were as high as 90%.
I
mean, that doesn't
insane,
mean that, if you made $1 million, the government took 90% of your money.
Right.
It means that on your, millionth and first dollar, you gave up 90 cents. I mean, there are ways to structure it. So this is not like, the Bolsheviks, attacking and, nationalizing industries. Like we can have rich people and capitalism and tremendous rewards for valuable. Yeah, I got no beef with Bezos has got lots of money. Elon Musk has got lots of money. They have built things that people want at scale, and there should be rewards. But we can have much higher taxes and still have innovation, still have some, unequal rewards depending upon how you do. And we can finance a lot of things that now we've convinced ourselves we just can't afford.
Yeah, I've definitely come around to the idea that the wealth gap is pretty huge right now. And that's what we're focused on is the wealth gap, not necessarily the fact that they're billionaires. Yeah, okay, they're billionaires, great, but that gap wouldn't be so big if, like you said, they're being taxed correctly. So
yeah, well, you won't find me agreeing on taxes necessarily, but I will say you did mention lobbyists, and so what do you think about corporate lobbyists? In my opinion, I've said this on the podcast for basically years at this point, I think we should ban lobbyists for Washington D.C. completely, 100%, no lobbyists at all. The only voice that Congress should be listening to are their constituents in their districts. That's it. Or if they're in the Senate, then their state. That's my opinion. I just want to get your thoughts on corporate lobbyists and
I mean, I think there's some free speech issues in terms of just banning lobbyists and how do you define lobbyists? And, do we have a problem with the idea that a pension system that's stocked full of taxpayer funds and representing workers who are paid by our taxpayer funds should have some representative in Washington thinking about the rules? Sure. I mean, should somebody be looking out for, should labor unions have lobbyists? But, potentially the problem is that there's no transparency, right? I mean, companies can spend essentially unlimited sums of money to purchase the favor of politicians, and there's no tracking this. So we certainly need much greater transparency, and we need rules that limit like the sorts of things that lobbyists can do. I mean, I remember years ago, this just blew my mind when I was a cub reporter at the Washington Post covering the Maryland legislature, and the state spent, I think it was like $180 million to build a stadium for the Baltimore Ravens at a time when they were like, teachers were having to shell out themselves to buy like paper and textbooks for their students in public schools. And remember, they had some debate over reining in the power of lobbyists and whether the lobbyists should be allowed to give tickets to sporting events to politicians. And one member of the legislature literally stood up in the legislature and said, well, this seems incredibly unfair. I mean, a lot of us voted to finance that Baltimore Ravens stadium, and you're saying that we won't be able to get tickets to go see them? I mean, what kind of society is this? So, I mean, there's certainly a lot that can be done to rein in, how the system works.
Man. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, it all starts with the actual worker, standing up and doing something, I guess. So.
I mean, we don't have lobbyists, right?
Right.
Yeah, all we have is ourselves.
It's unequal.
So
yeah, that's why the podcast exists, dude. This is the whole point.
Yeah,
have good conversation.
No, power to
dude.
you guys for airing this stuff out. I really appreciate it.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, I haven't seen. So you do some interviews, but I haven't seen you on a lot of podcasts yet. I'm kind of surprised.
Oh, honestly. I've done a lot of podcasts.
You have? Okay, I found one.
Oh, yeah.
I found one for the actual book, and I was like, oh, dude, this is great. Let me just go ahead and do this then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I've done. I did the Daily Beast. The Daily did a whole podcast.
Nice.
The Pivot podcast from Vox. I don't know, more than I can remember. But they're up on my website if you want to check them out.
Dude, awesome. Sure. Yeah, heck yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. That's probably it for us. You definitely summed it all up pretty nicely.
Giving us a lot of good insight. and we like hearing those different views and coming from different places and kind of just seeing what the other side thinks. We don't like that echo chamber style. I think there's too much of that, going on in America right now. We've got to hear the other side. We've got to be able to have a dialogue, and I think that's really important. So, I
mean, we all have more in common than is immediately obvious from looking at your Twitter feed or listening to, the most shocking podcast. Or, I mean, there are things that we can agree on, and we just got to keep asking who benefits from all this toxic discourse. The people who already have all the money. That's
right. That's you're right.
We got to get organized. Hey, thank you guys very much for your interest and for getting into it.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. I loved your book, so it was good.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I listened to it on Audible. I don't know, who was actually narrating? Was it you or someone else?
No, not me.
Someone else, right? It sounded different.
I can't remember that guy's name. But I like him.
Yeah, he was good. I usually listen to Audible two times speed, so it was still good though.
Oh, good.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm so
all right,
glad.
man. Yeah. So,
all right. Well, thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Awesome.
And send me a link when it's done. I'll put it out there.
Dude, for sure.
Thank you.
For sure.
Okay. Take care, guys.
You too.